Hello everyone, my name is John, I'm the Geeky Fanboy, and it's still June, which means it is still very, very warm outside, but it is also still Pride Month, and I decided this week I would like to talk to you about my favorite LGBTQ plus stories. I chose the word stories because I wasn't really able to just focus on movies only or TV series only or stuff like that. So I decided to go with stories, which means we're gonna encounter movies, manga, books. So yeah, the whole media spectrum. And mind you, those are only some of my favorites. There are a bunch of other stories out there that I know that I like very much, but didn't put on this list. And there are also a bunch of other stories that I don't know of, but that you maybe have heard of. So do feel free to tell me down in the comments below what your favorite LGBTQ plus stories are. But for now, I'll tell you about mine. So let's go. The first one I would like to talk about is a movie that I have recently rewatched, namely Professor Marston and the Wonder Woman. So this is a film I love so much for so many reasons. So for those who don't know, this tells the story of the creator of Wonder Woman, who, in case you didn't know, was also the inventor of the lie detector, but was also involved in a polyamorous relationship with two women. So we follow Professor Marston and his wife, who teach at university, and they are involved in psychology and stuff like that, and they get involved with a student named Olive, and they slowly but gradually realize that both of them are in love with her, and Olive is also very much in love with both of them. So they start this three-way relationship. There are children, and over time they sort of settle into this lifestyle they have naturally at a time when this kind of lifestyle was very much frowned upon. And as the story goes on, it's a lot about psychology and the lie detector, and at some point Professor Marston comes up with this idea of Wonder Woman, because he thinks he can include so many of the things he's learned over the years and he's come to teach at his classes. He wants to include them in these stories about this powerful female character. And we basically follow in this movie, we see how the relationship between these three people came to be, with all the highs and lows, and how Wonder Woman was created. So what I love about this film is that it tells you about people that at least I had no idea about. I had heard of Professor Marston as the creator of Wonder Woman naturally, but I had no idea that he had such an interesting life, that he invented the lie detector together with his wife, and that he was in a polyamorous relationship which also had a bunch of BDSM elements. So interesting. So there's so much going on here. What I love is that it not only focuses on how the women feel for Professor Marston, but it also especially focuses on the love between the two women, since naturally, as you can imagine, back then it was hard for those kinds of people to sort of go with, okay, I'm actually in love with someone of the same gender, but can I actually go with this? And there's often this question coming up in this film: is this love allowed? Is this kind of lifestyle we have? Is this kind of family we have normal? People will never accept us. That sort of stuff comes up a lot. But while that stuff comes up, the film also very much focuses on the fact that those three people are just happy being in a relationship with each other, and it's just so wonderful to see how naturally all of this comes together, and how they develop this lifestyle with, both women have kids, but it's all one happy family. It's never a weird thing. It never really stands out. It just feels natural. And I like how these elements, those relationship elements, then get included into the invention of Wonder Woman. How, this idea of strong femininity, etc., gets picked up by Professor Marston and included in the character of Wonder Woman. And then sort of towards the second half of the film to give the relationship a more like of an interesting touch. Professor Marston actually gets interested in the BDSM subculture, and he takes it to women with him to sort of introduce them to it, because it's all about like dominance and submission and a lot of his psychology studies. So he finds the BDSM lifestyle actually very, very interesting, and the women also learn to like it as well. And I love how all of this gets picked up and put together, and it just works so well. It's just a wonderful, wonderful love story. And I'm saying this as someone who's not into love stories at all. I hate romances because they're just not my thing, but this story is so wonderful and has something for like everyone. It's about homosexuality, it's about bisexuality, it's about BDSM, it's about loving yourself, it's about accepting the way you are is normal, even if other people around you say your lifestyle is not acceptable. And throw Wonder Woman in the mix there as well. It's just such a wonderful and emotional movie, and with like highs and lows and emotional stuff, and it's just a wonderful and beautiful story, so I like it very, very much. The second story I would like to talk about is both a book and a movie, namely A Single Man by Christopher Isherwood. I first encountered A Single Man while I was actually researching the representation of mental illness in movies, and I came across A Single Man, which came out as a film, I think 2011 or something, with starring Colin Firth. And I just absolutely fell in love with the story, and basically like 1 week later I read the book in like literally one sitting, and it's just such a wonderful story. A Single Man is about a man named George, who I think he lives in the 50s. It's like, yeah, 1958. He is a professor of literature in America, but I think he himself is an Englishman. And we follow him throughout his day. This book describes one day in the life of George. And what has recently happened to George is that he's lost his boyfriend, who he's been together with for a long, long time, many, many years, and they loved each other very much. But then his boyfriend died in a car accident, and George was absolutely just devastated and broken by that event, and falls into a deep depression. And that's where this book picks up, and we just follow George getting up in the morning, going to his job, talking to students, talking to colleagues, talking to friends, and then the book ends at the end of the day. I love this book for two reasons. A, how it depicts depression, because I think it is very, very close to what this general feeling of just being done with everything, that you are just on autopilot going through the day, doing your thing, even though you're not really paying attention anymore to what's going on, and there's like no light, everything is sort of like black and white, and you don't even really register what's going on anymore because you don't understand why you're even here. Because for George, life without his boyfriend doesn't really make that much sense anymore. It feels literally colorless. Like when you watch the film, the scenes in which George is depressed and not really thinking about his boyfriend or anything like that, it's very desaturated, not quite black and white, but very colorless. And every time you get a moment where George is reminded of his boyfriend, or he thinks about his boyfriend, or he is maybe making a connection with another man, the movie literally lights up and becomes more colorful. This is where the second element comes in. This movie is also very much about this relationship between two men and how much they loved each other. Christopher Isherwood himself, if you didn't know already, was also a gay man who wrote a lot of books and about his experiences as a gay man back in the early 20th century. And I just love the fact that this book just focuses on the relationship between these two men without ever making it like, oh, it's gay, it's weird, or it's about George coming out as a gay man, or George feeling uncomfortable as a gay man, or anything like that. It never really feels like that. There are only also, I think, maybe one or two scenes where that kind of thing gets addressed. It's so difficult to describe, especially the book, because you just automatically connect with George as a character when you read the novel. Especially if you're someone who also struggles with mental illness, you immediately recognize like telltale signs and the feelings that are being described in this novel, and you think, this, yes, like this is it. This is exactly what it feels like. And sure, it is not a very happy story, as you can imagine. It is a sad story. But there are like positive highlight elements about it as well. Like George goes through his day not expecting a whole lot, but we see him connecting with students he teaches, and students trying to like make a connection with him and trying to be friends with him. We also see him interacting with like long-term friends who even knew his boyfriend back in the day, and we see how these friendships and relationships have been impacted by his relationship to another man. And especially the film, like I said, I think this is highlighted very well, especially through the cinematography and also through Colin Firth's acting, who in the film is just fantastic. Colin Firth in general, just a fantastic actor. Colin Firth is always a plus. So I can definitely recommend both the book and the movie. I think the movie follows the book relatively well. It's also a relatively short book. So depending on what you prefer, if you're more of a visual person or more of a bookish nerd, definitely go and check out A Single Man. It's a wonderful story. The next story I would like to talk about is also both a book and a movie, namely Morris. So, Morris was originally a novel written by E.M. Forster. It was originally written in the early 20th century, but wasn't published until E.M. Forster had died, I think in 1970, but it was written like around 1914. Because at the time, E.M. Forster, who I think himself was gay, wrote this, but didn't really want to publish it during his lifetime, which I guess is kind of understandable in the early 20th century. And this story is about a young man named Morris who, over the years, comes to realize that he is a little bit different, meaning that he is gay. But as you can imagine, early 20th century, that is an unusual thing for a young man to realize. And we follow Morris mainly throughout his university days, as he at first comes into contact with a fellow student who is basically responsible for Morris's sexual awakening. So he encounters Clive, who is this fellow student, and the two of them begin to realize that they are both attracted to one another, and they begin a relationship. And we follow these two men as they actually like live happily together for a while naturally having to keep this sort of a secret, since, as you can imagine, 1914, around this time, being gay, not quite the best thing to be. And it is about Morris learning to accept himself, Morris falling properly in love for the first time, dealing with general relationship issues. But we also see in the other characters, like Clive, for instance, that not everyone at the time especially was prepared to really admit to oneself that yes, this kind of relationship is normal and it's okay to be in love with another man. So they more or less have sort of a fallout where Morris is a bit more of a step ahead in real life, or accepting himself, and Clive is not really ready for it, as we see especially later as we follow Morris throughout the next couple of years, that Clive has more conformed to this general straight heterosexual lifestyle, getting married, that sort of thing. And it's this thing we had, forget about it, it wasn't real, you can't really be in love with another man. That kind of thing doesn't happen. But Morris actually comes to realize through the relationship to another man whom he meets actually through Clive, because he, I think, works for Clive. So it's the gatekeeper. I'm trying to find out what his name was. Who works for Clive, and him and Morris form the second major relationship in the story. Alec. I remember his name, Alec. The gamekeeper is named Alec, and him and Morris embark on another relationship that is so intimate and emotional. It really makes Morris realize this kind of thing is okay, and I have found someone who I can be 100% myself, I can be happy with. But at the same time, especially since Morris is a bit more upper class-ish, um, it's difficult developing this kind of relationship, as you can imagine, and Alec also himself is not prepared to just be like an affair, like, so it's sort of this, also to a certain degree, this classic relationship stuff these people go through, added to the early 20th century problems with being gay at the time. But, and I know this is a bit of a spoiler, but happy ending. Because I think I should mention that for a novel that was written in the early 20th century about gay men, happy ending. No one dies. Alec and Morris are happily together by the end of this story. Because I really feel like I should mention that. Because that will kind of surprise me when I watched the movie / read the book for the first time. Because I don't think you would expect that from a book written at that time about gay men. Because you would feel like either one of them would die or they would never ever see each other again, that sort of thing. No, it has a happy ending, and while the story does have its high and lows, I think it's a very sweet story and holds up surprisingly well. Like, it doesn't have these sort of morals, pointing fingers or anything. Sure, it does have these moments that you expect from a story set in the early 20th century of people being like, we can't be gay, it's not allowed, that sort of thing. But like I said, it ends in a surprisingly nice manner, you know. And I watched the movie first before reading the book. I read the book like 1 or 2 years later after having seen the film for the first time. The film, by the way, stars Hugh Grant as Clive, so the student love interest, and the other love interest is played by, what's his name? Rupert Graves, I think the actor who plays Lestrade in BBC Sherlock. So yeah, go out there. It's great. The movie is a couple of years old already. I think it was made in the 80s. I'm not quite sure, but it holds up really, really well. Also, like, Hugh Grant just looks pretty as always with the wavy hair and everything. And I just really like the boarding school vibes, especially like the first half of the film. And again, for the book nerds, the book I think is written wonderfully. It has a wonderful, like, early 20th century Edwardian kind of language. Like, Ian Foster has a very like expressive writing style. I think it can sometimes be a bit confusing at times because he's not very good at pointing out who is talking right now when we get like speech and dialogue, but it's more about the descriptions and the feelings, and it just feels right, and it's very colorful. So yeah, if you're into movies, go watch the movie. It holds up really well, and I think has very, very good acting and very nice and pretty cinematography. It certainly feels very, very English. The movie and the story in general. Or go read the novel. It holds up surprisingly well. And it's also not that long of a story, so go and check out Oris. The next story I want to talk about is actually a manga series. At least I think it's only a manga series. I don't know if there's an anime adaptation. Well, I read the manga, and the manga I'm talking about is Requiem of the Rose King. I'm holding up volume 1, but I have all the other ones as well. I don't know how many there are at the moment. Let me look. 11. I have 11 volumes at the moment, but yeah. And look at this cover. Just for the record, all of these covers are absolutely beautiful in this series. So, Requiem of the Rose King initially caught my interest because it is based on the Shakespearean history plays. So, it's all about the Wars of the Roses, especially about Richard III. So, Richard, who is this black-haired fellow up here, in this manga series starts out as a young man who wants to help his father win the war and become king, etc., etc. But twist, in this story, since we're used to from like Shakespearean stories that Richard III is like, you know, a hunchback and he's very hideous and that sort of stuff, which naturally wasn't actually true. But sort of the twist here in this this unnatural side of Richard is that he's actually intersexual in this story. So he has elements of both male and female biology, and that becomes a huge issue for the character throughout this story, since he does identify himself as a man and is also mostly by his family and the people around him accepted as a man. But then we also have elements like his mother absolutely hating him, calling him like the devil, and when she birthed him into this world, he was the devil's child. He was an absolute demon, which is because of his unusual biology. And this gets picked up frequently throughout the story, that Richard begins to struggle with his identity, both as, you know, just as a knight, as someone of the royal family, but also just as someone who struggles with gender identity. And this is also connected to his sexuality, since he's very much sort of forced into this straight romance stuff, you know, like he has to get married to a pretty aristocrat girl because that's how things work in Middle Ages, Renaissance times. But at the same time, he also finds himself very much attracted to other men, especially men who he's not supposed to be attracted to. Like there's a whole thing going on that he gets into a friendship / relationship with the king. For, I think it's Henry VII. Is it Henry VII? No, it's Henry VI. I think. Who's from the other house, who he's definitely not supposed to have anything to do with, least of all be attracted to, but it's happening. And there are other characters throughout the story who are supposed to subscribe to this classic royal shtick, but find themselves weirdly interested in Richard and even weirdly attracted to him. And I just love how the manga series plays with this idea of gender and sexuality, and how it is symbolized throughout the manga series, how much of a struggle it is and how much it is visualized. And we also get like these references to Joan of Arc, who appears to Richard as like a witch-like character who sort of symbolizes this idea of that Richard fears this feminine side of him, which is almost like devil-like, because that's what he's been told throughout his life, that this double gender thing he's got going on is something that makes him weird, and that the feminine side of him is something unnatural and something he's not supposed to express. But throughout the series, he is also to a certain degree forced to express, or has to get into, or learns to be more or less comfortable with. In general, I can say that Requiem of the Rose King is just a fantastic series. It feels very Game of Thrones-ish here and there, because you really don't know where the story is going at times. Even if you think, yeah, I've read the Shakespeare history plays, or I know about the Wars of the Roses, you sort of generally know where the story is supposed to go, but sometimes the story really throws you for a loop and like kills off characters there where you're thinking, that's not supposed to happen that way, or it does things with Richard's character where you're thinking that definitely did not happen in real life. There are so many cool twists and turns, and just like the symbolism and the visuals of how this manga plays with Richard and this inner fight he has about his own identity is absolutely brilliant. So I can definitely recommend this manga series to you. In general, if you like into cool, like dark fantasy, medieval drama stories in manga form, definitely can recommend that. And if you're looking for something more interesting and different in regards to LGBTQ plus stories, I can also recommend this story. So Requiem of the Rose King, go check it out. The next story I would like to talk about is also both a book and a movie, namely The Danish Girl. So I absolutely love this story, if I may say so. So I'm probably talking a bit more about the movie than the book here. I have read the book, however, it's been quite a while. I think I read the book like 5 years ago or so, while I watch the movie at least like once a year. So there you go. For those who don't already know, The Danish Girl is based on a real life story, namely the story of Lily Elba, who is played in the movie by Eddie Redmayne. And she was basically one of the first transgender people, or transgender women, who underwent like actual surgery and everything to transition. And the story starts off with Lily when she still lived as a man and was married to a woman, and they were both painters and even quite famous at the time. They live in Denmark, but slowly but steadily, Lily realized that she does not feel comfortable in her body, and there's this wonderful scene in this story where she is meant to pose for a portrait for her wife, and has to like sort of put on a dress, and this sort of serves as almost the awakening moment for her, where she realizes where you can see her sort of touching this dress and starting to like really pose in a more feminine way and that sort of thing, where she begins to realize that she might actually be really like this, that she likes being like this, that this is her, that this feels natural. And it sort of goes on where they go to like a party, I think, and they, as a joke at first, sort of want to dress Lily up like as a woman, have her present as a woman, and sort of play off as, oh, this is my wife's cousin or something. But it turns out that this is not just acting for Lily, that she is really this person, and she is comfortable being this person. This is who she is. And this story tells how Lily comes to realize who she actually is, who she identifies as, and how this impacts both her life and her and her marriage naturally as well. Since, as you can imagine, her wife at first, like, we just started this as a joke. This is not real. This is not actually happening. But then the wife also sort of realizing, okay, no, I see that this is who you actually are, and I want to support you in your journey, and which I think is so sweet. And I know this is not 100% how it happened in real life, because I think the wife in real life was actually gay. So yeah, a lot of stuff going on. I think the real life Lily may or may not have been intersex as well. Please correct me here if I'm wrong. Which does not really get picked up too much in the movie. I think, if I remember correctly, it gets a bit more addressed in the books, and at some point Lily starts like having weird nosebleeds and feels like very weird, unhealthy, which I think sort of has to do with her being intersexual or something like that. But I know there has been, over the past couple of years, been like a huge discussion on should cis actors be able to play trans people, that sort of stuff, which you are allowed to have your personal opinion on. Personally, just me personally, I have no problem with that, as long as the actor just takes the role seriously and is aware of the kind of person they are playing and know about the struggles that real life trans people face and are respectful of these people and of those experiences. I'm fine with that if the actors are respectful. And Eddie Redmayne naturally is a wonderful, wonderful man, and portrays Lily with such honesty and like raw emotions and feelings. There is, for example, this scene where Lily like really seems to realize full on that she identifies as a woman, where she goes into the theater, like looks at all these dresses and costumes and absolutely is like really into it, and starts posing in front of the mirror, and like undresses and stands naked in front of the mirror, and like hides all of her like male body identifiers to appear more female, looks at herself in the mirror and just has a moment, and it's just framed, filmed, and portrayed so beautifully. It gets me every time. Just this whole story. It is also to a certain degree, a sad story, it has to be said as well. Because I feel like I should mention that the movie does end, spoiler, with Lily dying at the very, very end, and her wife, or ex-wife, sort of visiting her at the hospital and then being there when she passes away, and sort of just like going out and thinking of her and all that. But up to that point, I think this is a wonderful and honest story. It's not, naturally, like I said, I can totally understand why some people might not be into this because it's a cis man playing a trans woman. I absolutely understand that, but personally, I feel like Eddie Redmayne plays this with a lot of honesty, and like he really respects the story behind the real life Lily, who, by the way, also wrote diaries, which I tried to read, but I just can't get a hold of them. I can't find them anywhere, but I would really love to read her diaries at some point. So for me, also since this was sort of one of the first, well, sort of quote unquote first, straight up like story about a trans person that I was exposed to, I just really connected with this for some reason, and I just love the whole vibe and cinematography and everything about this movie. So if you're prepared to have your emotions tangled up a bit, but you're prepared to see a very emotional and personal story of a trans woman who existed in real life back in the early 20th century, definitely go and check out Danish Girl, either the movie, which is absolutely wonderful, or the book by David Abershoff, which I remember was also quite a good read. Okay, and I've decided to also go for some more international stories, since we all need to get away from only English-speaking stuff, you know? Go and watch a movie with subtitles. It's good. Which is why I decided to go for two more stories, two films actually. The first one is the Korean movie Method. So this came about purely because I wanted to watch more Korean movies after having watched Parasite and being quite into it, and having a friend who's like a bit into like K-dramas and K-pop music. So I was like, yeah, sure, I kind of want to get a bit more into that. And I came across Method, which naturally sort of spoke to me from the premise, because it's about acting, and I'm like, yeah, it's about acting in the theatre, and I'm into that. So this is about two men. One of them is like a very seasoned actor who's been in the business, and he's always taking all of his roles very, very seriously. As you can imagine, he often goes method when he does acting, and he is partnered up in this new play with a younger man who I think is meant to be like this sort of K-pop idol star. You know, very popular, especially like on social media, and it's like always followed by groupies, that sort of stuff. And he decides to get into acting, and is signed up to be the co-star of this new theatre production. And naturally, as you can imagine, in the very beginning, the seasoned actor is like, I don't know what all this nonsense is about. This kid has no idea what acting is about, and I'm supposed to play alongside him. How is that supposed to work? So the seasoned actor, whose name is Ye Ha, and the younger man, who I don't want to get these names wrong, who's called Young Woo, they start out not really liking each other, as you can imagine, because Young Woo's like always late to rehearsals and doesn't really take it seriously, and is sort of like this pretentious rich kid. And Yeha is like, what the F am I even doing here? But then Yeha starts to like he tries to get this boy to act seriously, both in the play and in real life. And Young Woo is slowly starting to come around to the idea, and like gets more into it. And the two start forming a bond. They start forming a friendship. They learn about each other's lifestyle, since Young Woo is very much like this K-pop idol star, very super famous, who from the outside seems like, oh, he's just rich and spoiled, but actually has a lot of stuff going on as well. And Yeha has like this girlfriend or slash wife, and it all seems like happy-go-lucky. But naturally, as you can imagine, this whole relationship between these two men does not just stay as a friendship. So this all comes down to the fact that the two actors, or the two characters these two guys are supposed to portray, are like in a love relationship, and this play they're supposed to put on is all about like falling in love, but also like betrayal and honesty and that sort of stuff. And as you can imagine, as these two have to learn to love each other on stage, it also transitions into real life. And especially for Yeha, you're not quite sure, is this because he actually falls in love with this other man, or is it because he's like method acting? So you're not quite sure where this is going, but at some point these two just like a relationship develops, as you can imagine. And it's all about like this line between, is this real? Are they both really in love with each other? Is one of them acting? Is one of them taking it a bit more seriously than the other one is? Because especially Yeha has a bit more of a hard time admitting to what is actually going on there, and Yang Woo's maybe taking it a bit too serious. So I don't want to spoil too much. There's not a whole lot of like on-screen gay moments, or however you want to put that. It's more about like the feeling and the bond and the vibes between these two men as the story goes on, especially towards the second half of the film. It goes into a slightly like super dramatic, unexpected direction, I think, especially like sort of vibes suddenly like really change the second half as they put on this production finally, and all of the emotions they have in real life are basically just projected onto the stage, onto their characters, where like you really full on blur the lines between characters and real life actors in the story. And I'm just a huge fan of the whole premise in general, of the vibes. I'm just into that. It maybe I can see some people being dissatisfied with the ending. I don't want to spoil it too much, but yeah, I can see some people not really happy with that, since I'm not quite sure if you could say that it goes into cliches or like negative portrayals. I'm not quite sure. Like I said, you maybe have to see it for yourself, but in general, I really like the vibes. I'm just a huge fan of the premise in general. I just dig that sort of stuff where you're like, it starts out as something, oh, we're just pretending, or this is not actually happening, or I don't really like you that much, but then it sort of transitions into, oh no, this might actually be happening. Judge me, I'm just a big fan of that, story-wise. And yeah, if you're into non-English speaking movies, this is a recommendation method. And the last story I want to talk about is again an international recommendation, namely Freefall. So Freefall is a German movie that I watched for the first time last year, because again, I was looking for more international stuff to watch, and I was like, international queer movies, and this film came up, and it stars Max Riemert, who some of you may know, because I think he's a bit more famous in the international audience. I think he was in Sense8. I think he was Sense8. I've not watched that. I have not watched that show, but yeah, he's in this film. And this film is about two men named Mark and Kai, and they are both policemen. They're starting out as policemen, and Mark is like happily married. He has, or had at least had a girlfriend, and they are expecting their first child. But as you can imagine, things go awry as Mark and Kai start slowly but steadily start befriending each other after having a bit of a rocky start. They slowly realize that they are in a weird way attracted to one another. So it starts out being like, oh, this is just like, we're just fooling around, like there's a joke. Like they go jogging together, and then one day Kai, I think, kisses Mark, and then it's like just a joke, dude, no homo, that sort of thing. But for Mark, this sort of flicks a bit of a switch, and he's beginning to realize that he might actually fall for this other man. He doesn't really know how to handle it, since he's never really experienced these kinds of feelings for another man. And it's very much about the struggle Mark goes through, because on the one hand, he wants to have this like happy family life with his wife and their first child on the way, but on the other hand, he's for the first time realizing that he's going through a new emotional experience, and it's with another man, and he doesn't really want to lose that. He wants to explore that. so it's about this personal journey of Mark and how he tries to handle both of these lives and how he tries to find himself. And also, what I think is very interesting, there's this look into like the police community and how homosexuality or just like being different in general is not a very good thing if you were like in the police. So it's not necessarily like the main theme of the movie, but I thought it was quite interesting that it here and there it sort of dips its toe in this territory where it tries to go for, okay, this is how homosexuality is actually perceived in sort of in like police academy circles, which, as you can imagine, is pretty negative. Big surprise. So yeah, it's also kind of about that. So since Kai is maybe a bit more comfortable with being gay and expressing that a bit more, but also is still not quite sure how much he can express that around his colleagues, and Mark especially is like super careful because he has this job in the police and is like, I cannot show that to other people that I'm having feelings and having sex with another man. That's not really happening at all. And again, this is not a happy film. This is very much a drama. It does have these moments where you're like, okay, no, Mark is actually that he's happy in this new relationship, that he is into this man, and that he is coming to realize something about himself that he's never even considered. And to a certain degree, you're like, you really want Mark to just be happy and be together with Kai. But on the other hand, he has this wife and he has this child on the way. So, like, where are you going? And of course, like, the wife wants him to like full on be there for the family. But on the other hand, Kai is also like, I don't just want to be an affair. I want more because I love you and I want this relationship. And Mark is just in the middle of it, being like, I don't know what I want. I want both lives, but that's evidently not possible. So if you're up for a more dramatic, not entirely happy, but just like honest, emotional story, go and watch Freefall. It does sort of follow cliche storylines here and then. It does take a while in the beginning until it sort of gets to the interesting bits. And again, the ending is I could imagine a bit dissatisfying for some people. But again, I'm like, I want to recommend more international movies, so that's my German recommendation here, Freefall. Okay, so that's it for this list of my favorite LGBTQ plus stories. Like I said, there are many other LGBTQ plus stories out there in other forms and other media. For example, just as an honorable mention here, if you're out looking for video games, go and play Tell Me Why. It's by the same makers who made Life is Strange. It came out last year. It's about two siblings, and one of them is a trans guy. I talked about that game in another video, so go and check that out. But that just like as an honorable recommendation that is supposed to show that you can find these kinds of stories everywhere. As long as you look out for them. And like I said, do tell me down below, in the comments below what some of your favorite LGBTQ plus stories are, and if you've heard of any of the stories I've told you about, do feel free to tell me what you thought about them. I'll read every comment. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and especially subscribe if you haven't done it already, and I'll see all of you next time. Goodbye.